Okay, I want to thank you all for coming out on this beautiful afternoon and sitting in front of your computers to learn a little bit about cultural diversity. So what I'm going to do today is share with you this project that I've been working on for 8 years to show the diversity that we have in the state of New Hampshire, and using my camera as a way to celebrate and honor the diversity that we do have in our state. Okay, so I like to let everybody know at the beginning of my talks that I have two very strong biases. And one is that I believe strongly in diversity. I think it adds to any kind of community. And I love this quote from Maya Angelou that in diversity there is beauty and there is strength. But also, as we're celebrating the differences that we have with other people and with other cultures, there's also an important point about recognizing the very many ways in which we are similar, that we all have the same dreams to have a safe home for our families, to support our families, to be able to freely practice our traditions, etc. So I also like the idea of sharing our interconnectedness. And there's this wonderful Bantu term from sub-Saharan Africa, Ubuntu, which is loosely translated as I am because you are. So let's talk a little bit about migration so that we're all on the same page with some of these terms. An immigrant is anyone that moves from one country to another. And since there have been people, there have been immigrants. Nowadays, most of the reasons why people move from one country to another is to reconnect families, sometimes after marriage, to come together with different families, for education, to find better education in higher education compared to what you might have in your own home country, or to find special kinds of jobs and opportunities for employment. And then there's a subset of immigrants that are also looking for safety, or finding a home where they can be safe. And that subset of immigrants are called refugees. These are people that are forced to leave their country because their government cannot or will not protect them. But fortunately, there are international laws that protect refugees. So refugees are people that are fleeing persecution, threats, violence, war, genocide, and they are usually processed through the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, the UNHCR. And the UNHCR would then work with our State Department, and our State Department in turn works with local leaders, local governments, in order to resettle refugees in various states. Refugees are resettled in all states and all territories in the United States, as well, of course, in other countries. Refugees also go through a very rigorous review before they come to this country, and that review process can take up to years. There's another category of immigrant that is not very different from a refugee, and those are the asylum seekers or asylees. And these are also people that are fleeing persecution, threats, violence, genocide, war, etc. But the difference is that they are applying within the United States. These are people that can't go home because it would be too dangerous for them. So they argue that point to American authorities and apply for asylum status. So now I'd like to look at a little bit of the data on New Hampshire refugee resettlement. So this is specifically refugees. There are 3 points that I want you to take away from this graph. The first one is to look at the orange bars. These are the refugees that came from Asia, and specifically South Asia, and specifically Bhutan and Nepal. The southern Bhutanese were run out of their country and had to flee their homes and their farms because of oppression from the ruling government at the time. And so they were able to find safety in the camps, the refugee camps in Nepal. And even though those were very difficult living situations, those refugees lived in those camps for 20, sometimes even 30 years. So over the years, gradually, the UNHCR started moving them out of those camps to other countries, and many of them came to the United States and some to New Hampshire. For several years, the Bhutanese were the largest ethnic group amongst the New Hampshire refugees. But you notice that orange bar is going down, and that is largely due, at least in initial years around 2014 to 2016, because the camps in Nepal started to empty. The people that wanted to leave were able to do so. So those numbers have decreased. Now, the second point I want you to take from this graph are the blue bars. And those are refugees coming in from Africa, and specifically the Central African countries like South Sudan, Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda. And those numbers have been going up in the last few years. And that is because very often the numbers and the origin of the refugees that we get reflect some of the violence that's going on in their home countries. So as the violence is increased in some of those African countries, the number of refugees, with a little bit of a time lag, the number of refugees has increased. The third point I want you to get from this graph are the year totals in that gray line. Those numbers bounce up and down over the years, but since 2016, those numbers have plummeted. And those numbers will probably continue to go down as long as the current administration is in control. So in 2012, I started this project called Different Roots, Common Dreams. Now, the reason it initially got started was because there was some very hateful graffiti, racist, terrible words that were scrawled on the sides of 4 refugee homes with an indelible magic marker. And it was a way of frightening these people. And I saw then that this was a terrible way to treat people from other countries. And I decided then to use my camera and my interest in photography to show there is a better way to treat our new American neighbors. Now, this project works in New Hampshire, partly because we're 90% white, 90% non-Hispanic white by an official US Census. So people are really amazed sometimes that there is this much diversity, but that's part of the point of the project. In fact, one photography friend told me when I started this project, he said, "Will you be done in 15 minutes?" Well, it's been 8 years. So the project is documenting through my photographs the lives of New Hampshire's immigrants and refugees. It is a statewide project, but obviously I'm going to places where there are the most communities of people from different countries. And that largely, especially for the refugees, is the central southern corridor of New Hampshire, specifically between Laconia and Nashua. So far in this project, I've recorded over 60 countries of origin. And I want to point out that all the photographs in this show I have taken, and all of them were taken in New Hampshire. It's also important for me to point out that I've signed releases for these photographs so that people know how I'm going to be using them. So under each photograph from here on, you will see this very short caption, which includes the country of origin for the person in the photograph. And then underneath that is the location in New Hampshire where I took the photograph. In most cases, that's where they live, but that's not always the case. So the project goals are threefold. First was to bring attention to New Hampshire's diversity, to show the general public that we do have remarkable diversity, even though it's not very evident. And I've been very fortunate to have had the opportunities to see so much of this diversity. So I wanted to bring it to the attention and to share it with other people. The second point of the project was to honor the photographs, the people that I'm photographing, and to be able to show the vitality and the contributions, and to honor that vitality and the contributions of the new Americans in our community. The third project goal is especially important in this time, and that is to stimulate the public discussions and the awareness on issues of immigration, immigration policies, and refugee resettlement and diversity in general. So now I'm going to show you a few photographs. And when I show photographs, I tend to group them into what I call kind of life themes, like people celebrating their traditions or working to support their families, instead of showing them by grouping the people by ethnic group, because that sets up the exact silos that I'm trying to break down. So first, I'm just going to show some of the beautiful faces of people that I've encountered. This woman from Sierra Leone was very excited to have her photograph taken. I was photographing her in her home, and she kept running upstairs and putting on a different outfit and coming down to be photographed again. This young woman from Egypt had just completed a master's degree in business administration. She called me up and asked me to take a photograph of her that she could use on LinkedIn. She was working hard to find a job in the United States so that she didn't have to go back to Egypt, which at the time would have been very unsafe for her. This man from South Sudan shows the scarification that is very typical of men and some women in some of the African cultures. And it's an example of both his bravery, his toughness, and also his tribal affiliation. I believe these parallel lines show that he is a member of the Dinka tribe in South Sudan. Families and friends. I like this photograph to be able to remind you all that my project probably would not work if I were doing it in black and white. And I think a lot of photographers feel very strongly about black and white as the best way to show photographs. But for this project, color is absolutely essential. This is a family that I have photographed many times over the last 8 years, and all kinds of events. The arrival of new babies, a wedding, graduation, and sometimes just being at home with them and photographing the mother of the family cooking in the kitchen. Those are some of my favorite photographs. These men are at a wedding reception for a Bhutanese couple, and they are dressed in their finest for this wedding event. I was photographing the wedding and took a break and sat down on a couch across the room from them. And they were talking to each other in quite an animated way. So I asked the young man who was sitting next to me, who spoke Nepali, what these men were talking about. And he said that they were reminiscing about their boyhood in Bhutan. This is one of my favorite photographs. I love photographing young people. This young girl, her family came from Russia, and I met up with her and her mother in Littleton in order to talk to her mother about her journey and coming to this country. But they're actually from Colebrook. But she made a point to have her daughter dressed up in traditional Russian dress. This young fellow is at one of the community gardens in Concord and with his father, and he was helping out and feeling obviously very proud of his help. The community gardens are very important to many of the immigrant communities, the immigrant families. They're able to use these plots as a way for them to grow the kinds of vegetables that are important in their culture. This garden up by the NHTI very often is filled with mustard greens and sometimes plants like African eggplant. And I've just come across recently a type of squash called a lauki, which is very good, very typical of South Asian cultures. The Concord Multicultural Festival is a wonderful opportunity every year, except this one, for bringing different cultural groups together to show their traditions. And this young girl had just come off the stage from dancing with her mother in a traditional Colombian dress and doing some very traditional Colombian dances. Supporting families. It's very important when people first come to this country that they get a good job, or at least a job that can help them with their basic expenses. Very often those jobs, even though many people do get employment, their jobs are very often at rock bottom wages, which is difficult. But it's important, of course, for the families to be able to pay their rent and buy the food and other necessities that they need. But there's another reason why earning money is very important for especially the refugee families. When a family is flown by the State Department to the United States from whatever country they're coming from, they have to pay back the federal government within the next few years for that airfare. And if you're bringing over a large family, that can be quite expensive. So they need to get employment fairly soon so they can start making those payments. So that's often something that's hanging over these families in addition to their other expenses. This woman was at a small market in Nashua. She is from Burma, also known as Myanmar, and she is a member of the ethnic group called the Rohingya. The United Nations considers the Rohingya to be one of the most oppressed ethnic groups in the world. I had a long wool winter coat that needed a new lining. And so I came across this Greek tailor here in Concord, and he was very excited about telling me about his thriving business back in Greece. And so in fact, this is a fun story. When I went in to photograph him, when I entered, carrying my coat that needed a new lining, he disappeared in the back room, and I wasn't too sure what was going on. And he came out with his hat on, and he wanted to make sure that I photographed him with his hat. So he also did a beautiful job in the lining of my coat. One of the ways that people often will start earning money when they come to this country is through their own traditional foods. And of course, this is something they know how to do. They know how to cook their foods. And we certainly enjoy some of the ethnic foods that people bring to our communities. So after this photo shoot, I got a very nice complimentary Mexican lunch. It was excellent. Many of the traditions that I've encountered circle around faith or religious opportunities. As in this case with this woman, this Muslim woman, who is celebrating Eid, which is the holiday at the end of the month of Ramadan. This was at the mosque in Concord, newly formed mosque in Concord. Often traditions involve dance and music, poetry, and these women are celebrating part of the celebration of Deepawali, which is honoring the success of light over darkness. And they were doing this at a performance up in the Hanover area near Dartmouth. Not all the traditions are necessarily joyful. This is a multi-year mourning process for the death of a small child in the Bhutanese community. The grandparents wrapped themselves in simple cloth and sat in silence, eating very little for many days. And then this was the last day of that mourning, and the Hindu priests lined the room and were all reading the sacred text out loud all together. It was like a sound of the Tower of Babel. It was quite remarkable. They were different sections of the text, and they were all reading them all at the same time. So this project has resulted in 2 books that I'd like to tell you a little bit about. The first one I published in 2015 and called it Different Roots, Common Dreams, New Hampshire's Cultural Diversity. This book is predominantly photographs. There's over 100 photographs in it. But as I was working on the book, I added at the end of it 6 stories by immigrants of their journey of settling in New Hampshire. The book has won 2 national awards, and I always donate all the net proceeds from my book sales, from my speaker fees, and my exhibit fees to New Hampshire nonprofits that support refugees and immigrants. This book is available at Toadstool Bookshops and as well as through my website. Now, this next book is literally coming out this month, and it's called Finding Home, Memories and Portraits of Immigrants. Now, this book is quite different than the first one. After finding out how much people appreciated the few stories that I included in the first book, I decided to focus more on stories of the process of coming and resettling in New Hampshire. In the first book, they were using the stories with church groups, with schools, with book clubs, community gatherings as a way to stimulate and talk about the immigrant experience. Over the last year, I interviewed and recorded the stories of 40 immigrant families. And then, of course, I had to edit these recordings because some of them went on for 2.5 hours. And so I edited them down to fit into the book. And then importantly, returned the edits to the people so that they could go over it to make sure that the story was in their words and that it was correct. And that's important to me because I don't feel I have any right to tell their story. I want them to tell their story. But then, of course, I added portraits. Being a photographer, there had to be photographs. So the stories of the people that are in this book are a mix of genders, of age groups, of 31 different countries, and 17 New Hampshire towns, including the North Country. Again, all the net proceeds from this book sale go to refugee support groups. And again, this book is available even today at the Toadstool Bookshop. So I want to show you a little bit about what the layout of the book looks like. And it's 11 inches by 10 inches. So it's like a medium-sized coffee table book. And on one side is the story of the person, and on the other side is their portrait. And then I also added, if you can see my arrow here, I added what I call Becky Notes. And there I share with the readers a little bit about my experience with this person or my experience with the photo shoot. And I think this just gives an opportunity to add even more humanity to the people that are in the book. You'll also notice in this particular book that it says I had an interpreter. There were only 2 stories in this book that required an interpreter. So I was very grateful for their help, but by and large, I worked in English with most of the people. Here's a sample of some of the photographs in the book, some of the over 40 photographs in the book. So this woman, if you can see my arrow going from the upper left, she's from Kenya. The next fellow here on the steps, he's a minister from Haiti. This young man is from the Congo. This fellow is from Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire. This fellow is working in a hydroponic farm. He's from Ghana. This is a high school student from Nepal in Concord. This man is from Bhutan. She is a graduate student from El Salvador, and she is a dancer from Colombia. So what I'd like to do now is to share with you some of the stories from these people, or a subset of the stories. And I picked out 2 of the stories that I'd like to share with you. And this is a Saribas family. They fled Turkey shortly after the 2016 coup. And so I'm going to read to you part of the story of that journey of leaving Turkey. I will be referring to sections told to me by Farid, the daughter, Nasit, the father, and Haser, the mother. They also mention in this story the term Hizmet schools. The Hizmet movement in Turkey is one that is in opposition to President Erdogan. And as a result, people who follow the Hizmet movement are in danger in Turkey. So first, Nasit, the father, is speaking. On the night of the coup in 2016, we were in our village. I wasn't arrested because they couldn't find me. But my name was on the list. They wanted to arrest Haser too. I had a tourist visa from 2013 trip with students. The rest of the family didn't have visas. I asked them what I should do. They said to leave because I couldn't help them there. I left Turkey alone in 2016. It was very sad. We didn't know if I would make it out of the country. One night after I left, police did come to the house to arrest me, but I wasn't there. The daughter freed. Some students and teachers from the Hizmet schools left Turkey. Some are now in jail, and some died in jail or trying to leave. My parents have many friends in jail right now. They tortured people in overcrowded jails with no heat or air conditioning. We tried to get visas twice, but were denied. Then my mother got the visa lottery. First, we had to be interviewed in Bosnia. My mother could be arrested as we were leaving, so we said a prayer as we passed the police, one that the Prophet Muhammad said to make himself invisible to his enemies. We prayed that we too would be invisible. We arrived in Manchester, New Hampshire in November 2017. We had clothes, but that was all. It's different here. It's not my country, but it's my home. I feel safe here. Again, Nasib. Think of a man in a desert with a camel that carries all his water. Then the camel runs away and he has no water. He keeps walking, then finds the camel with the water. That's how happy I was. The camel was my family. Someday, I want a house and a farm and lots of friends. Aser. We tell our story to bring awareness about these experiences. We are lucky to be here, but we don't want the people in Turkey who are suffering and dying to be forgotten. Now, some of the people in the book came fleeing violence and war and persecution. And other people came because they fell in love, or they were seeking an education or jobs. So I like to think of it as diversity in diversity. So in that, I would like to share with you a different way in which someone came to New Hampshire. And this is a bit from the story by Marjolaine Lambert, who lives in Berlin and came from Canada. I grew up in Coaticook, province of Quebec. My father was a carpenter. My mother was a stay-at-home mother. She made all my clothes and was a very good cook. She had 2 sisters in Berlin, New Hampshire. My Aunt Eva in Berlin rented an upstairs apartment to a man named Maurice and his parents. I had known him for a while, so I asked him to my aunt and uncle's 50th wedding anniversary. After that, we started dating. He was a Berlin native, but his father came from Canada to work at the Brown paper mill in Cascade. I came often to visit by train. The Berlin station was known as the Grand Trunk. One day I told him I wanted to teach before getting married. He said he would wait 10 years for me. I was 22 when we married in 1960. We had 2 children. Food was important for sharing our culture with the children. I always cooked French Canadian food at home, but I wasn't as good a cook as my mother. Back home, when I talked about marriage, my father would tease me. "What would that poor boy eat?" he would say. I told him I would get a big man so any weight loss wouldn't show. Poutine, French fries with cheese curds and gravy, is Canadian food, but we didn't have that growing up. It's a new dish, started in 1957. Canadian poutine is much better than poutine here. I used to make tourtière, a meat pie of pork, onions, spices, and a crust. I also made creton, a pork meat spread with onions and saltines. As a tradition at Easter, my father-in-law cooked breakfast, eggs, ham, and potato cakes. Christmas was a big time for cooking. Turkey was the main dish. My mother would make a log cake, la bûche de Noël, and all the candy. I never felt like an immigrant in Berlin. The adjustment was not difficult. There were so many Canadians that it felt like home, and I had relatives here too. I went back to Canada once or twice a year, until recently because of my health. I still have lots of cousins in Canada, more than 50. Now there are fewer French Canadians here, and children of French Canadians don't speak French. In 2000, they closed 3 Catholic churches in Berlin. They don't have Mass in French anymore, except on special occasions. Our priests don't know French. Not too much. Keeps Berlin going now. It's good we have a Walmart. So one other thing I'd like to do is that I think it's important not only for you to see the pictures of the people, to read or hear their stories, but also to get a feeling for some of the beautiful, rich accents that I've heard over the course of this project. So what I'm going to do now is play a snippet of the recording from my friend Mahbouba Akhtarzada. She came from Afghanistan a few years ago on a full scholarship to Southern New Hampshire University. Mahbouba had contracted polio at age 2 when she was a child in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is one of the few countries left, I think just Afghanistan and Pakistan, that still has uncontrolled polio. So she was growing up in a world where there was no American Disabilities Act, no ADA. So it was a difficult growing up. So she shares in this story a little bit about going to the Ministry of Education to get him to sign her diploma from high school. She had to get it signed early before graduation because she had already planned on coming to the United States, on coming to New Hampshire on a full scholarship to go to college. So we are going to now see how well this works. You may need to turn up the volume on your computer or your phones to make sure that you can hear this.
School and high school, the good things when I graduated from 12th grade, I made a huge impact on the teacher and school. So when I went to get my certificate from my high school, or we call it diploma. I went to the Ministry of Higher Education, and we had to like stop our car in the door, the big gate. We had to like stop our car, and from there to the minister office, I had to walk. So I walked. It took my time, but I walked, and my dad was walking with me too. My dad will sit somewhere until I get to some point, and then he will walk, and then he will sit somewhere.
He was fast.
Yeah, he was fast. And he wanted me to like take my time, and he's like, don't worry, I will just sit there, you walk to that point, then I will finish. So that's what we did. And when I get to the minister office, there's like million stairs that I have to go. So we asked the manager of minister, I said, can you please tell him that I'm here downstairs? You can just look from your office down and see me that I'm here, and he signed my diploma so I can take. He said, no, you gotta climb the stairs and make it good. I said, I can't climb the stairs, it's too much for me. I was already tired from all this walking, and it was hot too. It was a hot summer day, that's when I come to America. And my dad said, she can, and then they said, you're sorry, we can't do anything. So
this was the Minister of Higher Education?
Yeah.
And what were you seeking from him?
To sign my diploma so I can get it, get it before they actually giving it, because I have to come to America and I get a scholarship. So I was like, forget it, I'm going to climb the stairs. So I had to take my time and climb the stairs, and I went to the post office. He was so ashamed that he had to get up from his chair and like, I'm so sorry, I didn't say a word. I said, can you sign this? He said yes. He just signed it and went back to school. Yeah, I had to go back, but then when I went to school, all the teachers that they were supporting and not supporting circled me, and some of them are crying. Like, you're leaving and you made it, we are so sorry that we gave you such a hard time. And then they were asking me, where are you going? And my plan was finalized, and I said, America. They're like, you came to America, how are you going? I said, for studies, I got full scholarship.
So I also meant to mention that when Mabuba talks about walking, she walks with double crutches. So it takes her a long time to get around on her crutches. She is now a computer scientist, and she is working for a government contractor in Virginia. So one of the other things that I want to mention is that there have been many sort of side spin-offs from this project. And one of them was that in 2017, I partnered with the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and started a college scholarship fund for refugees called the Different Roots Common Dreams Scholarship Fund. Now, many refugees will go for an associate's degree through one of our community colleges. And fortunately, we have some of the best community colleges in the country. But often an associate's degree doesn't make them competitive for some of the jobs that they want or for their future in higher education. So this gives them the option to complete a 4-year degree or to even start as a freshman and go for the full 4 years. So in the last 3 years, we have been able to support 3 young people from different countries to be able to reach their American dream of good education. So although I've made donations to this scholarship fund, I am very pleased that many other people have also given through the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, which completely handles the fund. It's out of my hands at this point. But other people have been donating. So the fund, I'm happy to say, is growing nicely. And I hope it will continue to do so. So I always like to end by sharing with people different ways of things that they can do in their communities to make our new American neighbors feel welcome. First of all, learn about the local cultures, the challenges, and some of the differences and diversity in your own community. And start learning about it and engaging with people about this. You can become an advocate, a volunteer, and even if possible, a donor for some of these nonprofits that support refugees and immigrants. Very often these nonprofits are working on a shoestring and they really depend on volunteers and on donations to keep them going. You can involve your community group or your faith group to work as a sponsor perhaps for a family coming into your community, or other ways in which you can help out the different organizations or the people coming in to resettle in your community. And when you see somebody that looks a little different than you, smile at them, and you very often will be greeted back with a wonderful smile. Lastly, but perhaps most important, especially this year, find out about the stand on immigration and refugees for the candidates that are running for political office. Challenge them on their ideas about this and make sure you understand where they stand on these issues and let that influence your vote. This is so important this year because there have been so many changes in the immigration policies in this country in the last 3 or 4 years. And we really need to make sure that we continue to be a welcoming country. So with that, I want to thank again Toadstool Bookshop for sponsoring this talk. And remember, both of these books are available through the bookshop, and there is their website. And if you're interested in more about the project or my books, or if you want to get in touch with me, my website is at the bottom of the page. So with that, I welcome your questions, and we can unmute everybody and see what questions people have, if any, and or comments or reactions. I welcome them. So I'm going to stop the share. Okay.
Becky, I have a question for you. I put it in the chat, but I'll go ahead and ask.
Okay.
You commented on the importance of folks finding employment, getting jobs, because they have to earn money to pay back their travel costs. But don't they hit a lot of obstacles, a lot of stumbling blocks as they try to lawfully find a paycheck, earn a paycheck?
Yeah, probably the biggest obstacle that I have heard from people is the language, the barrier of not knowing English. And it just amazes me how fast some of these people learn English, especially, of course, the young people. But I think that's the biggest barrier. The other big one that I hear about again and again is transportation. That, you know, we're not really so great on our public transportation systems. And so, and a lot of times people don't have cars. Sometimes a whole family, you know, an extended family will get together and pool money so that one person can get a car. Then they not have to make sure that they know how to drive it. And sometimes that can be a problem if they don't learn, as I've encountered a few times. So transportation is also a really big issue, being able to get to the jobs. And then the other thing is a lot of times we see people coming, especially amongst the refugees, who are highly trained. I have friends that are doctors and lawyers and administrators, and yet when they come to this country, they have to pass all sorts of qualifying exams to be able to practice their skills. So they're losing out by having to end up schlepping boxes at Walmart or something like that, rather than practicing the skills that they're trained for. And we lose out because we have lost some of the good talent that these people bring to our communities. So I know of a dentist who is pumping gas in Vermont, and a doctor who is teaching, you know, 101 courses to nurses. So it can be very difficult. So I think some of those are the main issues. Do you have other thoughts on that, Joyce?
No, just that I know it's very complex, and I think we lose sight of the fact that when someone comes here from another country, it's not just a hooray, you've arrived, welcome, now go and live a life. It's very complicated for them.
Yeah, I certainly think that's true. And you know, the other thing is that very often the image that people get about America and their home countries is, you know, streets paved with gold and money on trees, and you know, we're all like John Wayne and riding horses. And so I think sometimes also there's a bit of a sort of a disconnect between expectations and reality. So I think that adds to sometimes some depression or just general discouragement. But still, it's the work ethic of a lot of the people that I've encountered is truly amazing, especially among the young people. I mean, there's work that immigrants and refugees will do that we'd have trouble getting American citizens to do. So we need to continue to having these people come into our country in whatever way possible. Other thoughts, comments? I know we've got some very good, yes, Amy.
I was wondering how many of the people in your book have been able to get citizenship?
That's a good question, because it's not generally something I specifically ask them. I
Right.
do know that several of them have gone for citizenship, and very often they bring it up in the story because it's a pretty exciting event.
Yes.
There's one elder Bhutanese fellow in the book who points out that getting citizenship is his greatest dream, and yet he doesn't speak English, and he's in his late 60s, and he's just not sure that he's ever going to be able to do that. Yeah, so I think, you know, there are some this is one way that people can help, is that there are some wonderful programs for helping people learn the material that is in the test for citizenship. And it's really pretty amazing what they have to learn. I mean, I was almost an American history major in college. And I remember the Federalist Papers, but boy, I can't speak to what they did. And, you know, it's all the details on that. And, you know, some of the rules and regulations that I bet most Americans would not be able to pass the citizenship test.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
Sue.
agree. Thank you.
One of the barriers to citizenship is the cost, and it has recently, or it will go up October 2nd, from what was $725, it'll go up to $1,200. 80% increase for the application for citizenship.
Yeah. And there's some people that don't want citizenship. I mean, if they get their once they get their green card, which gives them just about all the access to American life except for voting and running for office. You know, there's a fellow in the book from Canada who said, I don't want citizenship here.
All right.
Because I feel like it's not fair to my home country, which is.
And in some, like the Bhutanese have lost, they were citizenship in Bhutan was taken from them. So they have a greater drive to become citizens. They are stateless. And some other groups of people as well, but people whose countries are still, relatively, they're still relatively a part of them.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And for the Bhutanese, Nepal made a point that they were not going to give them citizenship when they were in the refugee camps. So I remember early on in my project, kind of before I understood all of these details, I met a Bhutanese woman who was going to get citizenship. She was probably in her early 40s. And I said, so what does that mean to you? And her eyes welled up in tears. And she said, because I have never had citizenship in my life. She said, and I guess it was, she was a small child when they went to camps. And she said, we didn't have Bhutanese citizenship and Nepal wouldn't give us citizenship. And she said, I've been here for you have to wait 5 years before you can get citizenship, a minimum of 5 years. And she said, I've been here for 5 years before I could get citizenship. So, it was an emotional moment for her. It was very, very important. And I hope it continues to be. Now, I know we've got some wonderful people on this call who have a great deal of experience working with immigrants and Nancy and Sue and others. So if you would like to chime in with any comments, feel free. And we also have somebody on here that's in the book, but she's dealing with small children, so we won't harass her. But we'd love to hear from her if she wants to say anything. Nancy, did you have anything you'd like to say on some of the work that you do?
Well, you were talking about the getting a job, and of course the one aspect of it is the asylum seekers who come seeking asylum, come to the borders without being vetted and have to have a long wait before they can get work authorization. So
Right. That's a good point.
Yep. So through the New Hampshire Conference, UCC, and various other organizations, we've got Seacoast Interfaith Sanctuary people here. We're trying to get host home networks off the ground and throughout the state, growing ones in obviously the Seacoast, also Concord, Nashua, and there's Project Home in Keene. There is a growing one in the Upper Valley with United Valley Interfaith. So 5 different locations, and we're even branching out a little bit into Vermont, and networking with Maine as well. Just trying to find people that are willing to host an immigrant until they are eligible to apply for their work authorization.
Yeah, and so people can find out more about that through the UCC New Hampshire website.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. That's good work. And Sue Corby is in charge of welcoming New Hampshire. Do you want to say a little bit about that, Welcoming Week?
I'm in charge, well, Welcoming New Hampshire is a statewide organization that's part of Welcoming America, which is an organization, nationwide organization, very strong, that its mission is to welcome immigrants, to help them become integrated into the larger community, and works on legislation, programming, all kinds of things. Then Welcoming New Hampshire has 4 what we call welcoming cities. Manchester is one of them. Manchester, Concord, Nashua, and Laconia. And that doesn't mean that Dover and Portsmouth are not welcoming. They're just not in this, I don't believe they've taken this route, but they certainly are welcoming cities. And in welcoming Manchester, we've done things like try to change some of the training programs that various, for example, Easter Seals had a 2-week training program for people who were going to become counselors in their facilities. They didn't have enough staff. Their facilities were not empty, but had empty beds in them. So we changed the training program to include more of the English that they would need. So we weren't starting with beginning English people, but with maybe an intermediate level and giving them the specific English that they would need. So in that particular program, most of the trainees were Congolese, and that gave them jobs, and then that enabled Easter Seals to fill their houses, or to employ them, and then to fill their houses, for which they had waiting lists. And we also do conversation cafes, or we did before COVID, which bring immigrants, and we call them receiving people. That would be all of us, and maybe immigrants who've been here, many immigrants have participated who've been here long enough to be on the receiving end of things. And for Welcoming Week is a 1-week, September 12th to 20th, or 22nd, not sure of those dates, Saturday to Saturday in that time frame. And that's a national welcoming week that where welcoming cities do different programming. And we're going to have Becky and her book, and I guess the same presentation, we'll put it on virtually.
Oh, I'll make it a little different.
Okay.
I'll put in some more just different photographs.
It's fine though. Excellent. And there's a group in Concord that's been working on a quilt that
Yes.
has in each square of the quilt, each square is 3 feet by 3 feet. Each square has 1,000 marks. There will be 45 squares eventually, 45,000 marks. And that represents the average daily number of people who are, of immigrants who are incarcerated in detention facilities. And those are, Nancy does a lot with those people in New Hampshire.
Yes. Yes.
We hope to do something to display that quilt during Welcoming Week, virtually again.
Yeah. That's going to be quite remarkable. That's an enormous job.
Yeah.
So there's all these different ways, even though I've been talking about the immigration issues, sort of people coming in and resettling here in New Hampshire. There's a lot of other issues of, you know, detention at the borders and incarceration of detainees and other issues that are, you know, also very important in our whole sort of national view of immigrants and refugees. That, yeah, go ahead, Sue.
I'm just going to put the Welcoming Manchester email, which is welcomingmanchester@gmail.com. And then there's also Welcoming New Hampshire. I think it's spelled out. I'm not actually sure about that. If it's not spelled out, it's abbreviated, but I think it's spelled out.
Yeah, good. Put that in the chat too. Excellent.
Yeah.
So notice those in the chat if people want to get in touch.
And there's Facebook under both Welcoming New Hampshire and Welcoming Manchester.
So do other people have any comments or announcements or questions that they would like to bring up? If not, thank you all so very, very much. How are we doing on time? Oh my gosh, it's almost exactly an hour. So we did good. I really appreciate your attention. And more importantly, I appreciate your concern for immigrants and refugees. And please continue to be aware of these issues in your community and continue to be aware of people's stand on them when they're running for office and help that to influence your votes. So thank you, my friends. Best wishes and enjoy the rest of this beautiful weekend. All right.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Mhm.